September 9, 1942. A remote forest in southern Oregon. A forest ranger spots smoke rising from the trees. He radios it in, thinking it's probably a lightning strike. Routine fire season stuff. Except there hasn't been any lightning. What the ranger doesn't know, what almost nobody in America knows, is that 2 incendiary bombs have just been dropped on United States soil by a Japanese aircraft. Not from a carrier strike force steaming off the coast. Not from a land base in Alaska. From a submarine. A submarine that surfaced, assembled an aircraft on its deck, launched it, bombed the American mainland, recovered the plane, disassembled it, stowed it back inside the sub, and submerged again, all in under 90 minutes. This is the story of the I-25. The Japanese submarine aircraft carrier that bombed the continental United States. Twice. And the pilot who became the only person in history to drop bombs on the American mainland during wartime. It's a story about one of the most bizarre weapons systems of World War II. A story about a mission that should have terrified America but instead became a closely guarded secret. A story about engineering audacity, tactical desperation, and a weapon that was simultaneously brilliant and completely pointless. The concept. Let me start by explaining something that sounds impossible, a submarine that carries its own airplane. Most people don't know this, but Japan built 47 submarine aircraft carriers during World War II. 47. These weren't small coastal subs. These were massive vessels, over 350 feet long, displacing over 3,000 tons surfaced, capable of sailing around the world without refueling. And each one carried a seaplane stored in a watertight hangar on the deck. The idea came from the Japanese Navy's obsession with long-range reconnaissance. Japan's strategic problem in the Pacific was simple: the ocean is enormous. To find the American fleet, you need scouts. Lots of scouts. Aircraft have range and speed that surface ships can't match. But you can't operate conventional aircraft from a submarine. So Japanese naval architects came up with a solution that seems insane: build a pressure-proof hangar tube into the submarine's hull, design a collapsible seaplane that can be assembled on deck, add a catapult to launch it, and figure out how to recover it when it lands next to the sub. The first experiment started in the 1920s. By the time World War II began, Japan had perfected the concept. The I-400 class subs, built late in the war, could each carry 3 aircraft and were designed to bomb the Panama Canal. But our story focuses on an earlier, smaller design, the I-15 class. And specifically, the I-25. The submarine. The I-25 was commissioned in October 1941, just weeks before Pearl Harbor. She was 356 feet long, displaced 3,600 tons submerged, and carried a crew of 97 men. Her armament was formidable for a submarine: 6 21-inch torpedo tubes forward, 17 torpedoes total, a 5.5-inch deck gun, and 2 25mm anti-aircraft guns. But the really interesting part was the hangar. A cylindrical tube 38 feet long and 11 feet in diameter, built into the hull just forward of the conning tower. The tube was completely watertight, maintaining normal atmospheric pressure even when the sub was submerged. Inside that tube lived the Yokosuka E-14Y1, a small floatplane designed specifically for submarine operations. The Japanese called it the Glen. The Americans, when they eventually encountered them, called it the smallest seaplane we've ever seen used operationally. The Glen was tiny. Wingspan, 36 feet. Length, 28 feet. Weight, about 3,400 pounds fully loaded. Powered by a single 340 horsepower radial engine. Top speed, 153 miles per hour. Range, about 550 miles. It was armed with one 7.7mm machine gun in the rear cockpit, basically a pea shooter, and could carry 2 176-pound bombs or a single 550-pound bomb. Here's the really clever part: the Glen was designed to be disassembled. The wings folded. The floats detached. The tail section came apart. the propeller could be removed. A trained crew could break down the entire aircraft and stow it in the hangar in about 20 minutes. Assembly took about 30 minutes if you were fast, longer if you were being careful. The launch system was a 26-foot compressed air catapult mounted on the deck, angled slightly upward. The recovery system was, well, it was the pilot landing next to the submarine, and the crew using a crane to hoist the aircraft back aboard. It was a Rube Goldberg contraption of epic proportions. And somehow, it worked. The mission. By September 1942, the war in the Pacific isn't going well for Japan. Midway was a disaster. The Americans are building ships and aircraft faster than Japan can sink them. The strategic initiative is slipping away. The Japanese Navy is looking for ways to strike back at American morale. To show that Japan can reach out and hurt the American homeland. To prove that the war isn't lost. Someone proposes using submarine aircraft to start forest fires on the American West Coast. The logic is simple, it's September. Fire season. The forests of Oregon and Northern California are dry as kindling. A few well-placed incendiary bombs could start massive wildfires. The fires would destroy timber resources, tie up firefighting personnel, and terrify the American population. The I-25, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Meiji Tegami, gets the mission. The pilot is Warrant Flying Officer Nobuo Fujita. His observer is Petty Officer Shoji Okuda. Fujita is a veteran naval aviator. He's flown from carriers, from cruisers, from battleships. But this is his first submarine deployment. And he's about to become the only person in history to drop bombs on the continental United States during wartime. The I-25 departs Yokosuka Naval Base on August 15, 1942. She cruises across the Pacific submerged during the day, surfaced at night to recharge batteries and run her diesel engines. The voyage takes 3 weeks. On September 7, the sub arrives off the coast of Oregon, near Cape Blanco. Tegami takes the sub to periscope depth and scouts the area. No American patrol boats. No aircraft. The coast is clear. That night, at 2:30 a.m., the I-25 surfaces about 50 miles offshore. The crew goes to work. The first attack. Assembling an aircraft on the pitching deck of a submarine in the middle of the ocean at night is exactly as difficult as it sounds. The hangar door opens. The Glen is rolled out on a dolly. The crew attaches the wings, connects the control cables, mounts the floats, installs the propeller, loads the fuel, and arms the bombs. 2 176-pound incendiary bombs designed to start fires. Fujita and Okuda climb into the cockpit. The engine starts, a radial engine on a submarine deck in the dark, and the catapult crew prepares to launch. At 0600 hours, just before dawn, the catapult fires. The Glen accelerates down the launch rail and hurls into the air. Fujita banks toward the coast. His orders are to find a forested area near Brookings, Oregon, and drop his incendiary bombs. The hope is to start a massive forest fire that will spread for hundreds of miles. Fujita climbs to about 6,000 feet. It's still dark, but dawn is breaking. He can see the coastline ahead, the forests of southern Oregon stretching inland. He flies about 50 miles inland, looking for a suitable target. At approximately 0630 hours, he drops both bombs over the Siskiyou National Forest, near Mount Emily. Then he turns back toward the coast, descending rapidly to avoid detection. The I-25 is waiting. Fujita lands the Glen in the ocean next to the submarine. The crew uses the deck crane to hoist the aircraft aboard. They disassemble it, stow it in the hangar, secure the hangar door, and dive. Total time on the surface, about 90 minutes. And the United States has just been bombed. The American response. Here's the thing, almost nobody knows about it. The forest ranger who spots the smoke investigates and finds bomb fragments. He reports it up the chain. The military sends investigators. They confirm that yes, these are Japanese incendiary bombs. And yes, someone just bombed Oregon. The government immediately classifies the entire incident. Top secret. They don't want the American public to panic. They don't want the Japanese to know if the attack succeeded or if there were casualties. They don't want to give the enemy any information about how effective submarine-launched air attacks might be. So they say nothing. A few locals know something happened, but the details are suppressed. The press is given nothing. The incident essentially disappears. Meanwhile, Fujita's bombs did start a fire. But here's the irony, it had rained heavily the night before the attack. The forest was damp. The fires started but didn't spread. They burned out after consuming maybe a few acres of undergrowth. Fujita's mission, from a tactical perspective, was a complete failure. The hope for massive forest fires never materialized. No significant damage was done. No one was killed or injured. But Fujita doesn't know that. He returns to the I-25 convinced that he's just started a conflagration that will burn across Oregon. And 3 weeks later, he does it again. The second attack. September 29, 1942. The I-25 surfaces again off the coast of Oregon, this time near Cape Blanco Lighthouse. Same procedure. Assemble the aircraft. Load the bombs. Launch the plane. This time Fujita flies deeper inland, targeting forests near Grassy Knob. He drops his bombs. Turns back. Lands next to the sub. Gets recovered. The I-25 dives and heads back toward Japan. Fujita has now become the only person in history to bomb the continental United States twice during wartime. And once again, the fires don't amount to anything. The forest is still damp from autumn rains. The incendiaries start small fires that burn out quickly. Total damage, negligible. The American government, once again, classifies the incident and says nothing publicly. Fujita returns to Japan believing he struck significant blows against American morale and resources. The Japanese Navy considers the mission a success, not because of the damage done, but because it proved the concept works. You can launch aircraft from submarines and attack enemy territory. The bigger picture. Here's what makes this story really interesting: submarine aircraft carriers were not a terrible idea. They were actually quite clever for Japan's strategic situation. Japan needed long-range reconnaissance. The I-boats with their scout planes could search vast areas of ocean, spot American task forces, and report their positions. That's valuable intelligence. Japan also needed ways to strike at enemies beyond the reach of conventional forces. Submarine aircraft could attack targets in Australia, New Zealand, Madagascar, the Panama Canal. They provided flexibility and reach. But, and this is critical, they were extraordinarily complex and resource-intensive. Building the hangar into the submarine's hull reduced the space available for torpedoes and fuel. The catapult and crane added weight and mechanical complexity. The aircraft required specialized maintenance. The whole system needed extensive crew training. And for what? A single tiny aircraft with a bomb load measured in hundreds of pounds, not thousands. A reconnaissance capability that could be countered by the enemy simply having more patrol aircraft in the area. The Americans looked at Japanese submarine aircraft carriers and decided they were a waste of resources. The U.S. Navy experimented with the concept briefly in the 1920s but abandoned it. American submariners wanted their boats optimized for one thing: sinking enemy ships with torpedoes. Japan, on the other hand, remained committed to the concept throughout the war. They built bigger and bigger submarine aircraft carriers, culminating in the I-400 class, massive subs that could carry 3 aircraft each and were designed to bomb the Panama Canal. The I-400 class never got to carry out their mission. The war ended before they could deploy operationally. But they represent the peak of Japanese submarine aircraft carrier development: enormous, complex, expensive boats carrying a strike capability that would have been marginally effective at best. What happened to Fujita? Nobuo Fujita survived the war. The I-25 didn't. She was sunk by the destroyer USS Patterson off the New Hebrides in September 1943 with all hands lost. But Fujita had been reassigned to other duties by then. After the war, Fujita opened a hardware store in his hometown. For decades, he told no one about his mission. The United States government kept the bombings classified until the 1962, 20 years after they occurred. When the story finally became public, Fujita was invited to Brookings, Oregon, the town he had tried to burn down, as a guest of honor in 1962. He was terrified that the Americans would be angry, that they'd want revenge, that he'd be arrested or worse. Instead, the people of Brookings treated him like a celebrity. They gave him a key to the city. He donated his family's 400-year-old samurai sword to the town as a gesture of peace and reconciliation. Fujita returned to Brookings multiple times over the years. He planted a tree. He spoke at schools. He became friends with the forest ranger who had discovered his bombs. In 1995, shortly before his death, he was made an honorary citizen of Brookings. It's one of the most remarkable reconciliation stories of World War II. The man who bombed America became an honored guest of the town he tried to destroy. The legacy. The I-25's attacks on Oregon represent the only time the continental United States was bombed by enemy aircraft during World War II. Not counting the thousands of Japanese balloon bombs that drifted across the Pacific on the jet stream, but that's a different story. The attacks accomplished essentially nothing from a military standpoint. They started small fires that burned out quickly. They killed no one. They destroyed no significant resources. They didn't terrify the American population because the government successfully suppressed the story. But they proved something important: submarine aircraft carriers worked, at least technically. You could launch aircraft from a submarine, attack enemy territory, and recover the aircraft. The system functioned. The question is whether it was worth it. Japan expended enormous resources developing and building submarine aircraft carriers. Resources that could have gone toward building more conventional submarines, or more aircraft carriers, or more destroyers. The American assessment was that submarine aircraft carriers were a strategic dead end. The complexity and cost didn't justify the limited capability. Better to build more submarines optimized for torpedo attacks, and more carriers optimized for launching large numbers of conventional aircraft. History proved the Americans right. Japanese submarine aircraft carriers sank relatively few enemy ships and conducted relatively few meaningful attacks. Meanwhile, American submarines, focused on commerce raiding and fleet operations, devastated Japanese shipping and strangled Japan's economy. Final thoughts. I started this by telling you about a forest ranger who spotted smoke in the Oregon wilderness. What I didn't tell you is that when investigators found the bomb fragments, they were baffled. How did Japanese bombs end up in a forest 50 miles from the coast? For a brief moment, American intelligence worried that Japan had established secret air bases somewhere on the west coast. Or that they'd developed long-range bombers no one knew about. The idea of a submarine aircraft carrier seemed too bizarre to be real. But it was real. The Japanese had built a weapon system so unusual, so complex, so seemingly impractical that the Americans initially couldn't believe it existed. And that's the thing about the I-25 and her sister boats. They represent Japanese naval thinking at its most creative and its most misguided. Creative because submarine aircraft carriers were genuinely innovative. Misguided because the resources spent developing them would have been better spent elsewhere. The I-25 bombed America twice with incendiary bombs that accomplished nothing. She proved that submarine aircraft carriers worked. And she proved that just because something works doesn't mean it's worth doing. Nobuo Fujita became the only person to bomb the continental United States during wartime. He carried the weight of that for decades, terrified of what Americans would think of him. And then he discovered that the people of Brookings held no grudge, wanted no revenge, and were willing to forgive. That might be the real legacy of the I-25's mission. Not the bombs. Not the fires that never spread. But the reconciliation that happened decades later, when a former enemy became an honored guest. If you want more stories about the bizarre weapons of World War II, we've covered the Japanese balloon bombs that killed 6 Americans in Oregon, the Nazi America bomber that was designed to strike New York, and the British plan to build an aircraft carrier out of ice. History is full of weapons that seemed like good ideas at the time. The submarine aircraft carrier belongs in that category. Brilliant engineering. Questionable strategy. And in the case of the I-25, a mission that accomplished nothing militarily but became a fascinating footnote in history. Until next time, remember, just because you can build something doesn't mean you should. And sometimes the most elaborate weapons are the ones that matter least.